everyone! Welcome to another Mish-Mashing Battle Lounge with the 2MK. Today we have started off with the exciting appearance of Son Goku from Puerto Rico. And we've already seen one really interesting match from our side. Unfortunately for your side, that match happened before stream, as we were getting the final setup. Hopefully the sound was good. There are so many interesting things about this player, just in immediate interaction. We do often get higher level players rank-wise stopping in, but those players usually have a different goal than whatever this person seems to have. It might be that this is functionally the only way they know how to play Akuma. Lots of footsies, lots of precision, using both the skill to and the trigger to. I'm surprised they went for that way.
Final round.
But either way, it's definitely the sort of thing that is going to be fun for a lot of our players if they stick around. And hopefully they'll have some fun too, as they're about the level where most of us can keep up with them but probably can't win, at least not consistently. So they'll be able to get a challenge but keep on playing, and we will have various things to both talk about and practice. There are in fact a perfect demonstration of one specific thing. The thing that makes you really good at this game after you understand everything is how accurate your attacks and timing are. If you understand when you should and shouldn't go for your attack because it won't hit, your opponent is in the wrong spacing, your opponent is in the right spacing but the timing's slightly off, you don't have enough meter to do this cancel, or if your opponent blocks, then you can't actually punish them because they spaced their offense really well. All of these little things quickly add up and lead to you being able to improve. Generally, practicing is enough. And sometimes our bots can take you to that level on their own, and sometimes they can't. Or rather, individual bots is hit or miss whether or not they're actually good at this. Our advanced bots, if you're good enough to input things like our advanced bots due to practice with others or just being a beast at execution and mental detachment, then you can definitely get some benefit out of really high level ones like Lucia and Karine. But our intermediate bots often have a bit more linear play and it won't show you this for every character. We in fact specifically aim to get the likeliest move in as often as possible, just so you have that chance of slowly picking up that information over time, whether or not this move can be spaced so that you can't just punish it normally. But this is technically the sort of opponent against whom we are in our element, to some extent. Until the defense breaks down, which is usually where this happens and fails, most of us understand enough about what's happening in any given moment to make decisions against someone who isn't trying to directly wait for us to make decisions and mistakes. Now obviously, defense breaking down is the thing that happens next, the thing that separates us from Platinum in most cases. If you understand how to not get killed in your own offense, then your opponent will eventually either give up or run away, Or you'll face someone who is good enough to force you to make mistakes in close range, or make so few of their own on defense that you have to start being a little bit reckless. Against this sort of opponent, you can try to perfect your spacing, and that's honestly often the best thing to do, but if you're used to playing in the silver, bronze ranks, low gold, really low gold, like people who technically could drop into silver with one fight, if the person plays a lot and is therefore at their level, the level they float at, for most characters in the game, the reason they're not necessarily doing well is because, let's face it, about 80% of the people playing the game right now, once they get shut down in neutral, just back off and wait for you to mess up. So they never give you the chance to get into the right spacing, basically until you've cornered them. And some characters, some tactics, are much better off mid-screen. They're waiting for you to make a mistake and somehow get cornered so that they can do some other stuff. Or in some cases, if they're not confident about that, just have as much screen space behind them to retreat. This has been something we were planning to talk about for the last 1 or 2 streams, but we didn't end up on that trend, and this week seems to be continuing the trend of players who are serious and not going to just do that. But that is, of course, where most of us are happiest. Even if our own little idiosyncrasies get pushed on more, you come away from streams, from matches like this, with a much better feeling, usually. I can watch these matches later, I can see something that specifically went wrong that can be improved, I can learn spacing things I don't normally see. And I can look at it, for example, in the Wolf's case, notice, okay, this much of my damage taken is because I failed this defense. This much is because I have this misconception about the character or misconception about something. Or how much of it is because I just dropped my execution and I need to go grind that a little bit so that I don't end up dying when under pressure from strong players. If you're the fortunate sort that can read that while you're fighting or immediately remember it due to having, let's say, photographic memory, then the situation's even better for you. Hopefully the opponent stays around and you can immediately start making changes if it had to do with defense or something. Execution, normally you can't do much about it except try to not go for the situations where you need it as much, but that's not always the best approach to have, especially if you're not dropping it every time. That does happen fairly often against really strong high output character opponents because you take damage and you take way more damage than you do against someone who's less prepared. So every time you make the mistake, there's much bigger cost. But that doesn't necessarily mean you should not try. This is, after all, usually, if not always, a practice lounge. And if you're that jittery, seeking a way to beat the opponent isn't really going to help. It doesn't help anyone else in the lounge because they either lose and leave after you played somewhat jittery, or they lose interest because you're not pressing on them, you're not giving them a challenge. They're having that experience they have, let's say, as you'd expect from that player type.
Let's do this.
So, since I doubt that Son Goku needs any help here, we'll focus, until they head out, on anything that we can do and on any predictions we have as to how to deal with the situation. Just Fine's usual problem with Akuma players is close range fireballs, which Bison can deal with pretty well, and in this case, we have an opponent using VT 2, V skill 2, which means there's no actual way to make the move safe other than EX, which is a real boon here for her. But they are willing to play footsies, so it's going to come down to footsie skill and defense skill. The other issue is going to be how exactly to stop Demon Flip should they start to use it. Because Bison is a little bit slow on dealing with this move sometimes. Literally, the frame data for the moves Bison needs to stop Demon Flip doesn't always do the job, depending on the spacing of Akuma. That is already a good adaptation that I expect to see quite a lot of here. This player, by necessity, must do a ton of moves that could be V-shifted if you had timing for it. Including the Demon Flip. And you see another pretty good choice there. Just by knows, this Demon Flip that you've just done is just advantage to you. I can't necessarily stop you, but I can push you off me, and once I've pushed you off me, you either have to do something else, or if you do the same Demon Flip, I'm both more prepared mentally. If you do a slightly different Demon Flip, I can actually counter it. These are tiny things, but of course, games like this are made of a ton of tiny, very fast interactions, and knowledge of yourself and situations that others put you in. Since one cannot necessarily just go straight for Psycho Burst to deal with Akuma's spacing, we're also going to see a lot of that. But it looks like she has all that Kage practice style of actually dashing when your opponent has particularly good air stuff to deal with. So, for now, it looks like Goku's going to have to go up one level at least to work this out. But still got it. Maybe they gave it because the combo dropped. Sometimes people actually have the mental capacity to give it, but a lot of the time it's just, oh wait, I stopped blocking because I figured the combo was over. Yeah, it's going to be hard to decide whether or not to Psycho Burst. There's the back jump to get the roll throw, as we call it, but it's still going to be the same problem with the defense here. The player switches to offense because, I mean, that's what you do here. Ooh, that is... I'm not sure if that was a good idea per se, but I don't think they would have been expecting the jump, so... can't be all bad. If there is anything they could probably put in more, it would be throwing, but I'm not sure that would work on Just Vine specifically. So, I'm not terribly worried. Even if they start to throw, it adds one layer of offense, but I feel as if she's the sort of person who tends to defend the throws pretty well. If anything, I'd worry about them starting to do overheads, because while blocking overheads is also a thing she does well, that is a type of pressure that really could be meaningfully added. So I'm kind of expecting to see the forward heavy punch, sometimes the actual V, cancels out of stuff that otherwise wouldn't be sensible to do because you're expecting your opponent to keep defending, and so on. This is a match that probably would have gone slightly better with the other V skill and V trigger from Just Vine's side, because right now, most of that's going to get caught up in V reversals, but the parry isn't necessarily going to help build up any meter, whereas there was at least a tiny chance of getting them to stay quiet enough or have a weird approach style interaction. using Hell Warp to dodge specific things, similar to how one would use a V-skill to do it. But that is unfortunately not the sort of thing you get to change mid-match in lounges. It's definitely the sort of thing one changes mid-match in tournaments. Still, keeping the pressure on both sides. Stomping right out of the way, huh? Ready on that, massive confirm. And they were slightly less ready on that part. It's surprising, really. Footsies.
Akuma wins.
But that was good. I only saw one moment where I would probably think to make any different decisions, and I can only say that as someone who at least understands how to play Bison. Plus, it looked fun compared to usual. But fighting Goku is always fun.
Let's do this.
In fact, based on both the comment in chat and the thing we were talking about, that was probably the best part. The player managed to keep everything moving so quickly that the actual mental strain of punishing the fireball got too high. So, props to them, because it's really not that once someone knows how to play the matchup that you never get to use the related tools. That's probably something you can say at the very top levels of these games, but if you go into the games expecting that because your opponent knows how to counter something you can do, that you shouldn't do it, then you're usually cutting yourself off and doing yourself a disservice. You have to make your opponent stressed enough that you get to use all your tools. And that's by choosing the correct tools first to add your stress up until you start to see little chinks in their armor, and then start throwing in more things that normally would get you punished. There's a good example. I mean, that move isn't strictly speaking a good thing to not do. A good thing to do, you can't just Tatsu in neutral most of the time. Even if you've spaced it correctly to not be strictly speaking punished, there's often things that go wrong from there just because you chose this as a tactic. But if you do it at the beginning against an opponent you think you might be able to take out, you'd probably learn, okay, what are you like? Are you jittery? Are you the sort of person who understands what to do here, even if I have the spacing perfect? And so on. Can damage. This player is a bit closer to what I'm talking about normally, but not necessarily entirely. I can't say this person definitely is just going to retreat a lot. Yeah, block through all of it. If it were me, I would have probably uppercut out too early.
Round 2.
But because I also hate techie throws and suck at it, it would have been about the same thing. That technique will always surprise me. It happens every time. Akuma can do that every time. At a specific range that isn't too hard to recognize you're having, but it always surprises me that it works. Similarly, understanding, hey, this player plays awfully pressury.
Ken wins.
Does that mean that they expect to me to block? Can I throw them more? But in the end, trying to walk up and throw someone like this is an invitation to taking a lot of damage. The main reason why you need to do it is to keep the pressure on.
Round one. Fight.
Ken has always had some of the best conversions in the game, but only recently got a couple of buffs that, however tiny they are, mostly seem to be around giving other people reason to do things enough that Ken actually gets to use them. This character lost a lot of power way back when with a certain specific set of nerfs that mostly involved preventing him from being able to absolutely force the situations that we're talking about here. This didn't change too much for lower level players because if you don't know how to defend against Ken very well, he still gets to force them. But high level players eventually figured out, oh well, he can't do anything to me from here. One of the biggest tricks you can quickly learn, for example, is that if Ken has hit about 3 buttons in a block string, Ken is no longer in range to hit more buttons. He also doesn't have any moves that work at that space that he gets to just hit for free. Unlike Akuma, who can even flip or go for stand heavy punch even if it is negative and then cancel and stuff, Ken generally just can't do anything. He hits heavy kick sometimes, but it's not necessarily a great idea, etc. Awareness. I'm not really sure if they had to do that without the crush counter. Still, you don't want to stress yourself if you haven't worked out mentally that you have time for the crush counter. And that's what I was saying before. By simply going, I don't know for certain that I can crush counter here.
Akuma wins.
It's easier to just walk into position, hit the medium punch, and do the other part of the combo.
Round one.
So yes, this is now getting fairly exciting. If you're the sort of person that likes watching Street Fighter, like tournament level Street Fighter, this probably ain't it, but you can still see enough of what's going on. And players are generally not dropping things. But you will still have always that chance, particularly because the lounge tends to be full of people who will go for things that they don't know work. And sometimes that turns out really well. As opposed to pros who know it will work and that's why they do it. We just do it because it looks like it should work. And that's our learning process toward the path of the pros. You don't see the hours we spend in training mode figuring out stuff that does definitely work and then, you know, dropping it online in lag while stressed. But at least it's there. And that means there's always a chance that it will come out. I can't say that for these two players, I don't know what their training regimen is, but they definitely seem to have the same sort of approach to the game. And that means we get to watch a lot more footsies this week than we normally do. One thing fighting bots will definitely do if you are to the point where you can deal with them, even if you can't always get all the points, because they're actually designed to be quite hard at the higher levels, to literally push you, is that they allow you to learn a lot of spaces and similar for this reason.
Akuma wins.
Son Goku continues to win the tournament today. They've had fairly good close matches, but so far, nothing that absolutely makes people think that we can beat them. However, the match you didn't see before stream was one where that looked possible for a bit. The problem is that now we have an Akuma who knows how to do this, has already probably figured out their opponent, and a Karin whose accuracy doesn't quite hold up to the requirement for it. So, we're going to watch and see if Kanzaki Dynasty can make sure to get into spaces where she doesn't need to worry about the scrambles that make her accuracy stat a problem. Because that's the basic path to victory here. If you were in tournament and I was spotting, that would be the only thing I would have to say. Make sure you do not get into places where that accuracy stat is going to matter. Which means watching the air a lot more even if your opponent never jumps. It means looking for the opportunities to punish, watching the spacing when you're in block stun a lot. Because when you're in block stun, you're not usually in much danger against this player. They're usually not far enough away that you have to worry about a throw mix-up, and they're usually not close enough that you have to worry about demon flip mix-ups per se. So a lot of very careful watching of spaces when you are forced to block can help a lot. But the main thing we see that is probably going to be her downfall, and it might not look it, you might have missed it. If they move in particular ways, jump in particular ways, and go over her head, chances are she's going to try to hit them. And chances are she's not going to be sure whether or not she's going to be able to strike with any given move in that situation. We're dealing with someone with the speed to kick Mayokins. So a lot of walking is going to be required here. Very precise concepts of when to do specific things. What helps even less is that she's been working so hard on learning to suppress the temptation to hit parry after every move, and finally meet an opponent where that's the thing you need to do. This is something that comes up often. It's not actually just perception bias most of the time either, because the reason you're losing at one rank, assuming you're trying to go up in ranked, is something you need to fix. And then as soon as you fix it, you go on to fight a bunch of people who have also moved past it. So it didn't matter. They've been fighting people who had to do it better to move past it for a while. So, one of the difficulties of this game in general, fighting games in general, is that the better you get, the harder it gets to beat players who are thinking in the ways that one does early. But yes, even that block stun is a thing you can watch, a thing that can be enough for you to recognize, oh, I can throw here because I've been pushed to a space where I can do that.
Round 2. Fight.
But it looks like that is more or less working out today. Most damage seems to be taken in other spaces, and from hitting too many buttons, which is something we all understand is part of life as a Karin who is working their way up. Because as you can see, most of the damage here is taken by pressing something that then leaves one with too much recovery frames, and then pressing something else because the opponent is in a space. This is technically also an accuracy problem. It is not an accuracy of your targeting, but more an accuracy of a part of your mind. Still, that outcome was not unexpected. After all, like I said, this person played her first, and has a fairly good idea of what will happen from there. Leveraging it more or less right, because these are the spacings you will fall for, these are the problems you'll encounter.
Let's do this.
Much less demon flip needed to be used, for example. We know they fought one jury so far, but we don't necessarily know what this particular jury player will be like. Or even if they will be a jury at all, but I think we have character select off today. Oh no, there we go. Definitely did see some... I did think I see people having to actually choose their character. You can tell I'm somewhat excited too, so I'm not paying attention to that. I'm paying attention to all of the little interactions that we're probably going to end up going over later. I don't think I would have gone for Kage in this matchup, but I don't know what this person's skill with Kage counts as, so we'll see. If you're a jury player and you miss face off against this type of Akuma, if you can recognize it, you're probably better off actually playing jury, because she has so many more ways to deal with all those little spacings you get put into, whereas Kage is much more limited in that regard. I think they keep on dropping the end of that combo. It looks like a timing thing.
Round 2. Fight.
In fact, that's what you can watch for. Can Kage actually do anything when Akuma's spacing is slightly off or at the end of a block string? I have the same problem with Colleen actually, and why I generally play Chun-Li against Akuma. Even when the person has demonstrated that they have much of an understanding of the matchup or superior skill, and I can't win on defense anyway. With Colleen I will have the same experience, but then I'll want to do more things. She just doesn't have enough options for this is exactly what I want to do right now, and it's definitely a good idea. You can hit stand, medium punch in a lot of situations, but just that space that Akuma likes to stand at makes life fairly hard. So this level of player using these triggers especially, you're not going to see much benefit from playing a character who doesn't have a response to that spacing. But that's a hard thing to look out for. You'll still notice, of course, though, that, and this might not be in any way because they're trying to run away, the fact that that keeps happening leaves our Kage player without a lot of options, so they end up backing off or continuing to block in a lot of interactions. So it's fairly dominant. Maybe they'll stay around and try their jury or some other character, but as they say, through no fault of their own probably, this ain't it, chief.
Round 2.
Kage has two things that they can do to make this situation better. The first is to just hit randomly heavy punch in neutral. The second is that this character does have a dive kick, but you could never probably get anyone with this dive kick. It's really not the point though. The point of the dive kick is that it helps minimize your damage while getting you out of a specific type of situation. It's similar to jumping in on Nikali. Like, you could dive kick right here where you think Akuma's coming for you, because if they wanted to stop you from jumping over their head, they have to be ready with the cross-cut uppercut.
Akuma wins.
And at that point, the dive kick actually helps. If they're waiting for you to jump, then they're not necessarily coming in for walking pressure. But all of this is still just pushing back the inevitable and a lot of misery, because any player worth their salt at this level will probably just punish you all the way. Still, you might learn more than you do sitting there, especially since you've been more or less forced to sit there. Even the crouching medium punch, which you could manage to force a block with, will make the situation worse for you possibly in the long term, because where it pushes Akuma to is still not good. Still, it does work out if you have the dive kick, because then he has to do more walking. Nakali can in fact do much of the same things. Nakali can, in fact, usually better than Kage. Just notice that Akuma's a little too far out to actually hit the next button. Hit medium punch and it help. But it looks like they are showing something relative to Kage, maybe? Does this interaction help us demonstrate it? Probably not, because Nakali doesn't do the same thing. So let's drop all that and move on. Maybe they'll show some Kage pressure layers or escapes. The Wolf doesn't practice against Kagebot often as far as I know, but one of the important things to know about Kage that separates basically the strength that they're giving up by choosing to play Kage right now is that their strings are easier for Nakali to both backdash out of and the way that Kage must do things, the moves you use for pressure, are borderline reactable at that point. So, in a way, Kage doesn't have a lot of good stuff he gets to do. With most of it coming from this moment, which must be trained. And I think you normally have to train this against players, so this is a good opportunity for the Wolf to get that training, because it's going to come up repeatedly. Kage puts you in situations where he is going to jump over your head. And the only way to beat this jump over your head most of the time is to dash or walk forward. You can backdash if your character is quick and has an invincible uppercut to execute as soon as your backdash ends. It also requires that their backdash is pretty fast. But other than that, you really have to watch out for that in every sense. And if you want to try neutral jumping, you can, but that has a lot to do with whether or not your character's neutral jump sticks out, probably a heavy kick, far enough to stop Kage from jumping. Crawly beast trade, not something most people will do. But this situation is the one you want to avoid. And it's hard to train after spending so much time at the lower levels. Train your anti-airs, train your anti-airs, train your anti-airs. People just drill into your head. You must train your anti-airs. And then, of course, you face a character where, no, don't anti-air, just move. Fortunately, Kage falls into the same pile of characters as Ken. Once you've been hit enough times, once you've blocked enough buttons, you get to react for free. You don't have to watch for the third thing that happens. So 1, 2, that is escapable. Urien is the other that most people know here. 1, 2, you can just treat it as a rhythm game. There are 2 beats, unless it's like stand medium kick as just demonstrated. 2 beats, and then you get to play. You get to do something. Usually you shouldn't try to hit the Kage player. You should try to figure out what is best for you to get out of the way so that you don't have to worry about anything else. This is also why you can benefit a lot more from not doing your own block strings. Because if you do your block strings, you have to decide in that moment whether or not you're going to play offense or stop. But Kage mostly just jumps, and they're correct to do it. Because the amount of damage Kage takes from most people's uppercut setups is quite small. So they're watching when you're putting them in pressure to decide, do you have enough resources to really hurt me if I just jump at you now? In the corner, this doesn't actually change a whole lot. You can back jump, you can forward jump sometimes. The only thing you can no longer do is backdash, and if you get the forward dash correctly, then the Kage player corners themselves, so you don't exactly have to worry about it. Unfortunately, the wolf has fallen into that space where managing to win a round changes mental state. Now they're reset, so maybe they'll be able to do this again, because the opponent adapts a little bit, but more time is spent figuring out, wait, what did I just do right there? And having to re-experiment to figure it out. But if you're watching just as the general thing, you can see it come out. Kage jumps, one blocks because you're not used to dodging. Trust us, if you tried to uppercut it, you probably would not get any better off. Hey, sometimes desperation wins games. Let's see what happens.
Kage wins.
Our Kage bot does let you train this, and I keep on thinking I need to build a different Kage bot to help you train it. But it's such a core concept of the character from what I've seen played that you can just find a Kage to play against. The character's fairly limited in terms of offense, yet unlike Colleen, for example, must play offense. Therefore, it's really not that much of a difficult thing to find practice points for. Just find a Kage player who isn't going to try to run away from you and learn the rhythms. He's relatively limited compared to most characters. And those few times where they start to use something else, the move is either minus or you don't care. Let's see then if we're going to see the return of the Shadow Onai. Is it okay if I call this Goku Black? Just Fine is way more used to both the dashing, which doesn't help as much on Bison because the dash is much longer and Kage gets to almost go for offense again. Pushing the player out at the second beat with the V-reversal, which Kage can't generally bait out. If it's a medium punch that starts this, you can just almost always do the thing. And, most importantly, dealing with the other flow. Like, understanding that range is wrong, I can back jump and hit this button. That spacing is good, but my defense can hold up from here and I'll get stuff right after. So on and so on. So this is actually, even though it doesn't look like it, this is a race for meter. Because their health is going to stay basically the same for most of these matches. And Bison is counting on a confirm in time to get a kill. The V-shift can still be used in the same way, because it doesn't really matter that much. Oh, but there's the jump. And that's what I'm talking about. It triggers the natural anti-air reaction, but the anti-air never works. This has more to do with Kage's fighting range to begin with than the fact that you can't anti-air Kage. It's not particularly harder to anti-air Kage than any other character. It's that Kage jumps from a space and stands in a space that most other characters just can't. They can't make you afraid that you must block at that spacing, whereas Kage's stomp means you can be forced to think about blocking from there. Unfortunately for Just Fine, technically managing to win the round without using meter before means that Kage functionally has won this one already. This is another situation where Hell Warp would probably have been better, because Hell Warp is a really good defense against Kage doing this. But she seems to have pushed through just on the crush counter. Fortunately, this character does also have no health, so you don't give up. You always hope for that moment where, yeah, I just get to hit you anyway. Because they had reached that far in the round without needing to use the meter, but it also meant that they didn't use the meter. judgment on their part being good means that they now still have the meter and can still finish the match without any problem regardless. So she has to think from the opposite side. I may have a big life lead, I may feel like I have control of this, but see that moment there, she might as well treat this as having a sliver, a pixel of health, because it's possible that that's the equivalent of what's really available. A lot of neutral has to be played, a lot of careful thinking has to be done to stay out of the situation where that confirm takes the rest of her health. Ooh, that made them miss. And there we go. The perfect choice at that spacing after that blocking. You could not, in fact, do the neutral jump. And you probably would have been thinking about the capacity to do the neutral jump, and almost certainly wouldn't have been thinking about the EX stomp anyway. That move being an overhead means that every single bit of your instinct is working against you in that moment. So perfect use of their meter. Yeah, I can definitely see this more as a situation where the Hell Warp should have worked. The saving grace here is that I don't think this person is a natural Kage player fully, so they don't always know when to do certain specific things. Basically, when your jump has missed, should you hit a button or not? That is more or less an experience issue. They would have managed to take the throw there anyway. And there's the better situation created once again. Still, we're worrying still. There's meter here. Exciting.
Final round. Fight.
However, still at meter disadvantage. Still have to put up with a bunch of little things. And still not, as noted, it's hard to get the life lead here. That is what I was about to say I expect to be the main thing. If the Kage continues to throw fireballs, Kage is a character who, by the nature of the red fireball, always allows Bison to dash through it. Not to say that you will manage to dash through every time, but if you are playing mid-range Kage with that fireball, expect that all Bison players can dash through it. Whether or not that's a good idea for them to do is harder to say. But the meter did its job.
Kage wins.
And things played out as expected in an exciting match on both sides.
It's go time. Let's do this.
So the best option for Kansuki Dynasty here is to increase her accuracy by just not playing Karine. The most advantaged character in terms of how she is feeling is probably Sakura. Kami will end up back where we started. Now, unfortunately, this means that Sakura being much harder to relatively play isn't necessarily someone to switch to. It's up to her at this point, really. But Sakura can handle the opponent better, whereas Karine is easier to deal. So it's hard to say. Because if it were still Akuma, it wouldn't be a hard decision. You could just keep playing Karine and make whatever adjustments you need to. But Karine will usually try to hit Kage, and Karine will usually miss. And this means that almost every time she has only one recourse, which can reduce her damage but will not be safe. So the one piece of advice I have here is, if you have missed your button, hold up. That's it. There's nothing else that needs to be understood outside of the normal play. This will convert the match back to her normal situation. If your Mayoken misses, if your heavy punch misses, it doesn't matter. As long as you have missed an attack, hold up. It doesn't even matter if it's like neutral whiffing buttons. See here? Even this would be still fine. Just, if you whiff, Kage isn't in position to make you hurt for doing it. Whereas, he can make you hurt for pretty much everything else. You don't necessarily even have to hold up, but the thought of it, the fact that you're thinking of that as your first option, means that you'll be able to realize, I don't need to hold up, my opponent's too far away. Instead of, oh no, what should I do next to get into my attack range? And that's always important. If you can find a little cantrip that will make you think correctly in a situation, use it, always. Whether it's checking your meter or deciding which button to not press. All of these things change your rhythm. And sometimes it is much more important to change your rhythm than to play the game physically better. Fortunately for Karine, Kage actually does lose, because once she has parry, the crossover doesn't necessarily work. There are other characters in the game like this where she can just use the parry to negate the Kage jump, because they can't necessarily get much out of jumping and then doing nothing. Now, it's also very hard for them to suppress the tendency to hit buttons. So, even if you don't do it every time, in fact, technically, because you won't be able to do it every time, if you got too good at this, if you got too good at hitting the parry in response to the crossover, it would probably be bad. But here we have... Oh, that was good based on another whole set of things that I definitely probably can't go into right now. But the range, the accuracy, the awareness betrayed. And oddly, that is what makes this a Sakura match. Because Sakura doesn't miss when she does things against Kage. She always has enough movement to reach. Or the thing she does puts up a shield so that it doesn't matter if she reaches or not. Karine, you have to actually remember and pay note of every spacing. So she basically gets tired fighting Kage faster. She has to do more things to do the same amount of damage, and runs out of meter and other things. Unfortunately, buttons on wake up. Yeah, this probably wasn't the better idea.
Round 2. Fight.
If the opponent were even slightly different, I would probably have said, sure, go for it. But their awareness is too high and their ability to stick is too high. So, in the end, it's going to be a damage race, and winning the damage race is only going to happen with perfect accuracy. Plus, they can always just stop jumping, which they've already done. I'm told that that was not intentional. Sort of.
Final round.
Or rather, the, oh, you're definitely going up into the air, therefore I'm going to hit you part. This is another good situation. Like, make Kage sit on the meter and the situation gets better. Especially if you don't take a ton of damage in the meantime. There's the trigger. I'm not sure if the parry would have been timed there. And parry's missed. They knew it, they knew there was going to be too much stress to parry, so they jumped. Or maybe they were not thinking about that because the match had gotten so intense. But that works both ways. Another thing that makes the pros look unbeatable sometimes is that they get pretty unflappable after playing this game as hard as they do for as long as they do. Alright then, we have rotated back around to our last Kage. And now, what this matchup is going to be, I have no idea. I've talked a lot so far. There will probably be a lull in me talking since nearly everything for all of the matchups has been covered. I would just be mostly repeating things unless Goku switches characters again. So, whether or not I continue talking probably for the next 2 to 3 rounds is almost entirely whether or not they stick around and if they stay in the same character vein. If they change character, I'll most likely have stuff to say, and if they don't change character from either Akuma or Kage, I've pretty much said everything I'm going to say after this match. But they have changed character, and therefore, that might not mean anything though, because no one wants to play the Kage Mirror. The Kage Mirror is one of the most annoying matches in this game, because they both constantly push each other out of the correct range to do anything, and then have no neutral. What even are you doing?
Let my beauty
Yeah, that would be it. They'd both be just playing slots in Vegas at that point. However, this is the Ring of Power, not Vegas. Is it Power? I don't even remember what this was. Okay, yes, I'm told this is the Ring of Power. The third king has moved out of their chair. Sadly, this situation is even worse. While you can definitely get many more options with Kage for hitting Claw, it's actually the Spanish ninja thing. You can get misdirected so much that you have to constantly watch to figure out whether or not you're being baited. And if you are being baited, you're probably going to take a lot of damage. On the upside, Claw really can't open Kage up the way Akuma can, so you're more so counting on being able to frustrate your opponent into hitting buttons, and then sometimes that will happen. So, there is at least that much. This is fairer, even if only in the sense that Kage will get more chances to land hits. They will not necessarily lead to, living, but it won't be that sort of shut down, blow up situation we saw before.
Vega wins.
That is the best win quote. I have never seen it, but that is the best win quote. Whatever I thought best win quote was before, dethroned.
Fight.
Fortunately, our normal suggestion for claw matchup knowledge still applies, and possibly applies even more if this player is not necessarily usually playing this character. Claw players want you to block, and they want exact control of where you are after you block. If you can make them whiff a button, they are going to hit another button, because you are not blocking, and if you are not blocking, things are bad. The only time this will happen, as you've just seen, is when they know you're walking away, and, you know, we're just hitting buttons anyway. Part of this has to do with the fact that even though this character has a lot of moves, a lot of them are long travel, big startup, require charge. So, if one wants to keep things going, given that a lot of the other moves are unsafe, you basically have to hit buttons. You're giving up your turn if you don't hit the button. Whereas since you're not usually all that whiff punishable, but if your character, if you have built up any skills whatsoever about what to do when you know someone is going to hit a button, then you can apply that particular skill to this matchup, almost always. That didn't make sense, really. Huh.
Vega wins.
Now this could be really interesting, or it could be completely flat, in which case I would have another good reason to give my voice box a break and not say anything. Our second Nikali does not have a lot of claw experience as a core thing. A claw player of this level, even if they're not naturally much of a claw player, we don't know. I guess we'll see in a moment when it shows us the level. But you can't always tell with that either, because you might spend a lot of time playing claw in battle lounges like this one. Are we connecting up? Are we getting claw? Yes, and yes. Level 11. So, the problem here is, the amount of experience required to really deal with this character on Nikali is pretty high. Because Nikali doesn't get a lot of places where Nikali gets to do things.
Let my beauty intoxicate you.
Without, like, cross-up jumps, for example.
Round one.
That massive range really stops Nikali from doing a lot of things. And forces one to rely on perfect ranges and good punishes. So I expect this match to be pretty dry, honestly. That is, however, a good adaptation, a really good first option. The fact that one can almost always hit Nikali's V skill after a push-out situation and force a block, and the very slightest of pushback might help.
Round 2.
But aside from that, there's really not a lot to think about or do. Jump medium punch might help on jumps, or you could just be ready with the uppercut or the crouch heavy punch, since Claw will generally get hit by those if you're ready enough. But then you have to be ready, and being ready requires dealing with everything else this character does. So unfortunately, even if my advice was reaching the wolf here, it's unlikely that it'll be something that can be pulled in for demonstration rapidly.
Vega wins.
However, it's not particularly useful to the next person in line either, since the wolf uses the skill 2, there's not going to be a lot of options or positions for that. You can't use it in the same way at all, and since it gives no pushback in the specific case I'm talking about, you can't prevent the things that Claw does that make this matchup hard. Should one switch V-skill for this? No, it's probably better to just get used to keeping on using your own preferred one and practice the whole matchup a lot more. But that's not going to make it simpler. So, I will in fact probably be going silent for a bit. While we witness what is probably going to be a beatdown and a half.
Round 2. Fight. Vega wins. Let's do this.
Let my beauty intoxicate you.
Round 1. Fight. two. Fight. Vega wins. Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. Vega wins. Let's do this.
This is another matchup where I'm not likely to have a lot to say. But not because there's not a lot to say in the core of it. JustFine's been doing a lot of work with our Clawbot, possibly preparing for another in-depth Clawbot stream, maybe a release on our website, 2-mk.org, to give explanations of how to deal with this character differently. So we're likely to see a lot of little things come out, but the fact that it is so in-depth that we need to have a whole stream or write it up means that covering it in whatever space of time their match takes with a player who probably can get so much pressure on her relative to what she's been practicing, thus to make some of it fail. No. Just enjoy the match and think of it as demonstrations of precursors to stuff that you may see in a couple of days, maybe weeks.
Round 2. Fight. Final round. Fight. Vega wins. Round 1. Fight.
One thing I am reminded of is how incredibly hard it is to choose the opening gambit in this match as Bison if you're using V skill 1. Not because V skill 2 is the automatic correct opening gambit, but because the opponent has to change their entire behavior when you have that as an opening gambit option.
Round 2.
Here is like, well, I guess I could dash, I guess I could throw out Psycho Burst, and that's about it. Nearly everything else Bison does in that situation other than, you know, backing off. Loses 2 claw just to take down heavy punch. You could jump, but it's really not a great idea. Unfortunately, it's also an extremely crucial part of the matchup. Because you have to get ahead of the game. I want to call that the hardest of reads, but that's more so the most sensible thing to do there regardless.
Vega wins.
It's not really you can't even call it a call out because it's so likely that that will work. Just as a generality. If your opponent has any thoughts of not sitting there blocking whatsoever, that is probably going to work.
It's go time. Let's do this.
But now we are around to a person who probably through their amounts of work, can actually do something in this matchup. Not because Karine is likely to do much outside of what she normally does, but training with Clawbot and understanding some stuff from some other bots makes the moment-to-moment decisions, if they play Claw, fairly easy for a Karine that has practiced this much, with the main downside becoming, how do I get your Claw off in time to land some finishing damage? Because this character can keep on avoiding you toward the end and make you use up your energy, enough to slowly, literally claw it back. But if you can get him to block enough to force the defense so that the claw comes off, he won't be able to do certain things, and Karine will be able to get forward. So this makes it very similar to Fang. You find the moment to hit the heavy kick as often as you can, and then you relax otherwise, because every time you manage to make Claw block the heavy kick, you've got something out of it. The problem is, of course, it's really hard to make Claw block anything, because Claw is usually the one hitting buttons. Doesn't care. Karine can't actually jump here either. You do get one benefit in that a very, very precisely spaced version of Orochi will actually deal with a bunch of stuff. Because Orochi is the one thing that reaches further than most things Claw would think of doing, which means there's usually a lull where Claw is defending after a big pushback interaction, and you'd think, well, one of us should move forward now, right? We should do something. No, Orochi. Always. You can do early Orochis in case you think they're going to hit a button, and late Orochi if you think they're going to block, but Orochi. The amount of times you get countered even by a good player, probably not enough that you care. But this is, again, only in a very specific interaction where you both did so many things that you're now out of each other's range considerably, and neither of you is moving, which comes up like once around. So we're talking the 5th level stuff here. Yeah, might as well spend it. This is not a match where the meter comes up a lot, but having the life lead matters a lot. And the Orochi does the job.
You win.
This is often the case when you find yourself at a loss in a matchup. There's some little tool that's missing to get you back to a situation that's better for you. If this were a more, as they call it, anime game, that might be less true. Most of those games don't have the same type of rhythm, except at the moment, Under Night and supposedly upcoming Melted Blood. Even Guilty Gear Strive in its current flow doesn't actually have this yet. We're expecting to see it when certain characters are released, or when they, like, poke at some balanced things that are happening. We expect changes to mechanics more so than nerfs all. But you know. The other thing you can do in this matchup is to have the confidence to just parry in the middle of block strings. But the problem with parry and claw in the middle of block strings is that you don't actually get any damage off it. And if you're lacking your meter, you really don't get any damage off it. So it's hard to say that one should activate it for the purposes of dealing with that. However, it's good to sometimes, like, convince your opponent, hey, I might do this, so that they, you know, hit less buttons. Since you're basically never going to win an interaction of buttons anyway, you want them to hit less of them. And then, of course, make the further adaptation of, once you have convinced your opponent to hit less buttons, know that you've done that, and remember what it was that you needed that to happen for. In this case, pressing less buttons is required so that Karine can either jump or hit heavy kick.
Round 1.
You can therefore think of activating V-Trigger as an unlock. You get to hit things you couldn't normally hit because your opponent now has to worry about you parrying other stuff. It's so hard to want to backdash against this character, given everything else going on, but you shouldn't generally neutral jump because he will do all sorts of things. It just gives him too much time. You can also parry out of his pressure strings on block because he doesn't really bait that well. He can, but you know, it helps to have that as an option for the same reason. Just make them think about something, force them to aim for the throw on your wake up instead of getting actual setups, because pressure after throw isn't as good as some other options. And of course you can stack it with that.
You lose. Let's do this. Round one. Perfect KO. Round two. Fight. Final round. Fight.
Unfortunately, I wasn't watching to see what level their Bison is. Bison's offense doesn't work terribly well on Kage because the character really just has to block more or less forever and eventually either uppercut out or backdash into stomp. So it's harder to say this is going to work. You can be oppressive, but if you aren't also doing so from a position of having a considerable life lead, there's always the chance that things will explode in your face.
Round one. Fight. Round two. Fight. Bison wins. Let's do this.
We're moving into our last on-stream match of the night. Possibly, I can't say whether or not we're going to close up terribly soon in terms of being able to join this and get some more matches, but this player has been playing for basically this full time, so it depends on what type of stamina they have. We'll most likely close the lounge when Goku teleports away, and you may end up seeing a relatively limited set of matches even if we continued, but that also means that many of us are going to be either not taking the turn offered or dropping out altogether, so if you want to jump in, now's the time. And then of course, if the player you want to face doesn't stick around, then so be it, just move on. Our plans for content have been shifted by some involvement with other games. And we're definitely not strongly considering making the game in question part of our actual streamed content as of this time anyway. So, you can expect that for probably a while, probably a month, there will be some reduced Thursday streams, though we were already reducing those. So this is just an official confirmation that that will be continuing for probably until September. There's also less chance of Tuesday content, but the chance of Tuesday content has gotten slightly smaller anyway because most Guilty Gear players have moved on, let's say, to Strive for the time being. And we still have to wait it out to get to the point where people who have gotten into Guilty Gear through Strive decide to drift back toward Xrd to make anything change there. We are still not picking up Strive as a group at this time, mostly because only half of us have characters we want to play, and we personally aren't necessarily that interested in the way Strive plays as of now.
Round 1. Fight!
You'd think it would suit, but in the end, we have very, very precise, taste in games, most of us. You can possibly at some point catch Strive content from OmniRabbit, which may make it onto the channel directly. And things are likely to shift a bit more once DLC comes out and we know whether or not certain other characters will appear, whether or not certain people will have characters they want to play a lot, and therefore enough internal team drive to get started against each other. My last check is that the method they use for bots is basically the same as Guilty Gear always is, i.e. not something we want to work with in any serious capacity at the moment. And we're not really expecting heavy changes, though I'll check into this again because I'm not absolutely sure. You can find our Guilty Gear XR exercises on our website 2-mk.org, along with the bots for other games that I've been talking about. The Dragon Ball FighterZ ones, if you're still interested in that game, they work even with the changes. And of course the full complement of Street Fighter bots, which currently covers every character, and will be so until Oro comes out, in which case we will make Orobot. It's looking to be yet another good year for fighting games, so join us every Monday at minimum for the rest of the year, and look out for information on when we'll be streaming on our Twitter 2_mk_FGC. Good luck with your training, and good night everyone.